Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're going to dive into the story of a legal battle that honestly could have killed one of the most important pieces of software ever written.
I mean, that sounds like a crazy question, right? But believe it or not, back in the early 2000s, this wasn't just a possibility. It was a looming threat for millions of people and thousands of companies. And what happened next was this audacious, direct legal assault on Linux and the whole idea of open source software. You know, the principle that code should be shared and built together by a community. This is that story.
All right, so let's set the scene. Our story kicks off in March of 2003 with a legal filing that was an absolute bombshell. It sent shockwaves through the entire tech industry.
Now, you've got to understand, SCO Group, they were a pretty small software company. But they decided to pick a fight with a giant, one of the biggest and oldest names in tech, IBM.
And we're not talking pocket change here. The lawsuit started out demanding $1 billion, but that number just kept going up, eventually escalating to a mind-boggling $5 billion.
So here's the core of their argument, and it was explosive. They claimed that Linux was basically a stolen product. They were saying that IBM had illegally copied valuable code and trade secrets from the proprietary UNIX operating system and stuffed it right into the free Linux kernel, the very heart of the OS, and in doing so violated all their contracts.
Okay, so to really get your head around this wild claim from SCO, we kind of have to do a little digging into a really messy corporate history. Because the whole thing boiled down to one question. Who actually owned the rights to Unix in the first place?
So this timeline here, it shows you just how messy this whole thing was. You can see Unix starts out at AT&T, then it gets sold to Novell in '93. Then Novell sells parts of that business to the Santa Cruz operation in '95, which, well, that eventually gets bought by Caldera, who then renames themselves the SCO Group. Now, at first glance, it looks pretty straightforward, right? But the devil was in the details of that 1995 sale.
This right here, this was the absolute foundation of their entire case. But hold on, Novell immediately shot back, saying, "Whoa, not so fast." They made it very clear that while they sold some business assets, they explicitly held on to the core copyrights for Unix, so the ownership was a huge point of contention from day one.
So, with this huge question of who actually owned the thing just hanging in the air, the fight didn't just stay between SCO and IBM. Oh no, it quickly spiraled into a war on multiple fronts.
You see, SCO didn't stop with IBM. They also sued Novell for slander of title, basically for having the nerve to claim they still owned the copyrights. Then, you had major Linux companies like Red Hat who fought back, suing SCO and arguing that their threats were nothing more than false advertising. It was just a total legal free-for-all.
But this is where things went from a corporate spat to something that threatened, well, everyone. SCO started sending threatening letters to the entire community. We're talking Fortune 500 companies, small businesses, even individual developers, demanding they buy a Linux license or get sued. All of a sudden, using free software had a potential price tag and a very real threat attached.
So, as all these massive lawsuits are grinding on, the judges keep asking SCO to do one super simple thing. Show us the proof. Where's the stolen code? The smoking gun?
And for years, crickets. They couldn't produce it. I mean, this quote from Judge Dale Kimball says it all. He was basically saying, look, you've made a huge stink in public, but in my courtroom, you've got nothing. SCO's entire case was built on hot air, not hard evidence.
But while the lawyers were doing their thing in court, something amazing was happening online. A website called Grok became this hub for a global community of tech-savvy digital detectives. And they started meticulously picking apart every single court document, finding inconsistencies and uncovering crucial evidence that even the lawyers had missed.
And what they found was an absolute bombshell. It was an internal email from an employee at Caldera. That's what SCO was called before they changed their name. And it was written a full year before they even sued IBM. The email shows that the company had actually hired consultants specifically to find copied Unix code in Linux, and they found absolutely nothing. Think about that. They almost certainly knew their case was a dud before they ever filed the lawsuit.
So with all this evidence piling up against them, the final nail in the coffin, well, it didn't even come from the IBM case. It came from the one case that the whole thing was built on, the fight with Novell over who actually owned Unix.
Right, so after 4 long years of legal fights, of threats, of this big dark cloud hanging over the entire open source world, the central question was finally about to get an answer.
And boom, there it is.
With that one, single, devastating sentence, the court ruled that Novell, not SCO, was the rightful owner of the UNIX copyrights. That sentence just vaporized the foundation of SCO's entire $5 billion legal war. They had been suing over property they didn't even own.
Well, after that, SCO pretty much crumbled. They filed for bankruptcy, their whole crusade just in ruins. But the whole saga left us with a powerful and, I think, enduring lesson about the fundamental difference between two ways of building software. To see why this matters so much, let's look at a different story. Let's talk about another powerful UNIX system, Solaris, made by Sun Microsystems. It was an amazing, innovative product, but it was proprietary. So when Oracle came along and bought Sun, they had the power to just end it. And they did. They laid off almost the entire engineering team, and just like that, development stopped. A single corporate decision erased a legendary piece of software from the map.
And right there, that contrast tells you everything you need to know. See, before Oracle killed Solaris, Sun had actually open-sourced an earlier version of it. That open-source code was then forked into a new project called illumos. So while proprietary Solaris died, the open-source illumos, it survived. And it's still being developed today by a global community because its future isn't controlled by a single boardroom.
And that, of course, brings us all the way back to Linux. The SCO lawsuit was a battering ram aimed right at the heart of the open source world. And it failed spectacularly. And this is the key takeaway, right? The community didn't just survive this attack, they fought back. They crowdsourced the truth, and they proved that open source wasn't just some quirky hobby. It was a resilient, powerful model, strong enough to withstand a multi-billion-dollar assault.
You know, the SCO case was a huge, defining battle for software freedom. But it was never going to be the last one. Today, with massive AI models being trained on, well, the entire internet, we're seeing brand new questions about ownership and copyright and what it means to be open. Which kind of makes you wonder, right? Where's the next big fight for open code going to come from?